Welcome to Binge Eating Reset. You're now on step 24. In the previous video, you discovered that you don't have to be strong to keep yourself from eating. And that being kind to yourself can be much more powerful than constantly punishing yourself. Today, we're going to take that one step further. Because there's something that many people who struggle with binge eating have in common. They're incredibly hard on themselves. Much harder on themselves than they would ever be on anyone else. And often, they don't even realize that critical voice is there with them throughout the entire day. That voice says things like, "See? You just can't do it again. You've ruined everything. You have no discipline. Why are you doing this again? You're hopeless." Maybe you recognize that. Maybe you don't use exactly these words. But you probably recognize the same feeling. That constant commentary going on inside your head. And do you know what's so interesting about that? We often automatically believe that voice without even questioning it, almost as if everything it says must be true. But it isn't telling you the truth at all. It's simply an old belief, an old way you learned to look at yourself. And that very same voice can actually make you eat more often. That might sound a little strange, because a lot of people think, if I'm just strict enough with myself, then I'll finally be able to keep myself under control. But most of the time, the exact opposite happens. Imagine you've had a really difficult day. You're feeling tense. You eat a little more than you wanted to. And immediately, that familiar voice starts up again. "See? You failed. Now it doesn't really matter anymore anyway." And what happens after that? You end up feeling even worse. And that painful feeling makes you want to eat again. Not because you're actually hungry, but because, for a moment, you want to get away from that painful feeling. And that's how the cycle begins. Not because of the eating itself, but because of the way you talk to yourself afterward. Think for a moment about a small child. A child who's trying to learn something new. Learning to ride a bike. Learning to read. Learning to walk. Imagine saying to that child every single time, "You're so stupid. You really can't do anything right. Why can everyone else do this except you?" Would that child actually learn any faster because of that? Of course not. Instead, that child would become insecure. They would become afraid. They might even give up. And yet, that's exactly what we do to ourselves. Day after day. Change doesn't happen by constantly tearing yourself down. Change happens when you allow yourself to feel safe enough to try again. And that's a very important difference. Self-compassion, by the way, doesn't mean that you suddenly think everything you do is fine. That's a common misconception. Self-compassion doesn't mean, "Oh well, whatever. I'll just do whatever I feel like doing." No, self-compassion means, I can see that today was difficult, and I'm still going to stay on my own side. I'm not giving up on myself. That's something completely different. Maybe you've spent years believing that being hard on yourself was the same thing as having discipline. But real discipline actually comes from trust, not from fear. Because when you're constantly attacking yourself, your body becomes stressed. And a stressed body is much more likely to crave quick comfort. Often in the form of food. So the more harshly you judge yourself, the more likely you are to reach for food again. Not because you're weak, but because your nervous system is looking for a sense of safety. That's why I want to give you a simple exercise to try today. Take a piece of paper and write down the harshest thought you often say to yourself. Maybe it's, "I've ruined everything," or "I'm worthless," or "I have no discipline." Write it down exactly the way it sounds inside your head. Then take a moment and really look at it. Ask yourself, would I ever say this to someone I truly love? Probably not. Then write a new sentence underneath it. Not something overly positive, not something you don't actually believe, but something that's both honest and helpful. For example, "Today was difficult. Tomorrow, I get another chance to try again." Or, "I'm still learning. Change takes time." Or, "One difficult day doesn't determine my future." Notice for a moment how different that sounds. Not gentler because you're giving up, but gentler because you want to keep moving forward. Maybe that feels a little uncomfortable at first. That's completely normal. If you've spent years being used to putting yourself down, then speaking kindly to yourself can feel almost strange. But the more often you practice this, the more natural it gradually becomes. And little by little, that inner critic starts to become quieter. Remember one important thing. You haven't changed by spending years being hard on yourself. Maybe it's time to try something different. Maybe kindness isn't the easiest way. Maybe it's actually the way that finally works. In the next video, we're going to take another important step. Because we're going to look at why fighting against yourself only creates more struggle, and how you can learn to work with yourself instead of constantly fighting against yourself. You'll see that in video 25. Stop fighting yourself. I hope to see you there.